The biting autumn wind swept through the small town of Riverdale, Wyoming Territory, in 1876, carrying with it the whispers that followed Pearl Fairchild like shadows. Standing on the dusty platform of the train station, her hands trembling as she clutched the crumpled note, Pearl felt her world collapse around her. Returned as unacceptable. Too plain for marriage. The words burned into her mind as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Pearl had traveled west as a mail-order bride, leaving behind the crowded streets of Boston and the pitying glances of neighbors who considered her a spinster at 22. She'd pinned her hopes on a new beginning with a rancher named Thomas Wilkes, who had advertised for a practical, God-fearing woman of good character. 3 weeks of travel, only to be rejected without even meeting her intended husband face to face. "Miss? You all right there?" The deep voice startled Pearl from her thoughts. She looked up to see a tall man with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes watching her with concern. His broad shoulders were draped in a worn leather coat, and a cowboy hat shaded his features. "I'm fine," she lied, hastily folding the note and pushing it into her pocket. "Just waiting." The stranger's gaze drifted to her small trunk and carpet bag, the only possessions she'd brought for her new life. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're one of the mail-order brides, aren't you?" Pearl felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "I was," she admitted, lifting her chin with as much dignity as she could muster. "It seems I'm not what was expected." The man's expression darkened. "Name's Keegan James," he said, removing his hat. "I run the Double J Ranch about 5 miles outside of town." He nodded toward her luggage. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Pearl hesitated. She had exactly $23 to her name, hardly enough to secure passage back east. "I'll find accommodations," she said stiffly. Keegan replaced his hat, adjusting it against the sun. "Mrs. Sullivan runs a boarding house for respectable ladies. I could take you there, if you'd like." Pearl hesitated, weighing her limited options. "That would be most kind, Mr. James." As Keegan loaded her trunk onto his wagon, Pearl gazed out at the vast landscape surrounding the small town. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The openness of the Wyoming Territory both terrified and exhilarated her. "If you don't mind my asking," Keegan said as he helped her onto the wagon seat, "who was expecting you?" Pearl swallowed hard. "A Mr. Thomas Wilkes. Do you know him?" Keegan's hands tightened on the reins. "I know of him. Owns the Silver Creek Ranch about 20 miles north." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Not a man I'd call a friend." They rode in silence for a few minutes, the wagon wheels creaking over the rutted road. Pearl found herself studying her companion's profile. Keegan James wasn't handsome in the conventional way of Boston gentlemen, but there was something compelling about his strong features and direct gaze. "May I see it?" he asked suddenly. "I beg your pardon." "The note. The one you were reading at the station." Pearl's hand instinctively moved to her pocket. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing if it put that look on your face," Keegan insisted gently. After a moment's hesitation, Pearl withdrew the crumpled paper and handed it to him. Keegan read it, his expression growing increasingly thunderous. Without warning, he pulled the wagon to a halt, struck a match against his boot, and set the note aflame. "Mr. James," Pearl exclaimed, watching as the paper curled and blackened. Keegan let the burning note fall to the dirt road, where it disintegrated into ash. "Thomas Wilkes wouldn't know beauty if it walked up and introduced itself," he said firmly. "You're beautiful, Miss Fairchild. Don't let any fool with poor eyesight tell you different." The unexpected compliment rendered Pearl speechless. No one had ever called her beautiful before. Pretty, perhaps, on rare occasions. Sensible and capable, certainly, but never beautiful. When they arrived at Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house, a tidy 2-story building with white lace curtains and a neat garden, Keegan helped Pearl down from the wagon with gentle hands. "How much does Mrs. Sullivan charge?" Pearl asked quietly. "Don't you worry about that just yet," Keegan replied. "Get settled in first." Before Pearl could protest, the front door opened to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with a kind face. "Keegan James, as I live and breathe. What brings you to town today?" "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Miss Pearl Fairchild. She's new to our town and needs lodging." Mrs. Sullivan's shrewd eyes took in Pearl's travel-worn appearance and the absence of a wedding ring. "Another one, is it?" she asked softly. Pearl felt her cheeks flame again. Another what, madam? Another girl sent back by some fool of a man who doesn't deserve a wife, Mrs. Sullivan said bluntly. You're the third this year. I didn't know, Pearl whispered, mortification washing over her. Mrs. Sullivan patted her arm. No shame in it, dear. The shame belongs to the men who make promises they don't keep. Come inside, and I'll show you to a room. Before following Mrs. Sullivan inside, Pearl turned back to Keegan. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. James. Keegan touched the brim of his hat. I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Fairchild. Perhaps I can help you find work in town. Pearl slept fitfully that night, her dreams filled with burning notes and the echo of Keegan's words, You're beautiful. She woke early, determined to make a plan for her future. She couldn't return to Boston not only because of the cost, but because she couldn't bear to face the pitying looks and whispers about poor Pearl Fairchild, returned like damaged goods. Mrs. Sullivan provided a hearty breakfast and information about possible employment in town. The schoolteacher just left to get married, she explained. They're desperate for someone educated to take over until they can find a permanent replacement. Pearl's spirits lifted. She had worked as a teacher's assistant in Boston. I could do that, she said eagerly. Mrs. Sullivan nodded approvingly. And there's the mercantile. Mr. Peterson mentioned needing help with bookkeeping. Can you cipher? Yes, quite well. Good girl. You'll find your place here. Mrs. Sullivan refilled Pearl's coffee cup. And don't you fret about paying for your room just yet. I've got an arrangement with Keegan James. Pearl nearly choked on her coffee. What sort of arrangement? He covers the first month for any mail-order bride who needs a place to stay, Mrs. Sullivan explained. Been doing it for years. But why? Mrs. Sullivan's eyes grew distant. His sister was a mail-order bride. Things didn't go well for her. She shook her head. Not my story to tell. But Keegan's a good man, despite what some folks say. What do they say? Pearl couldn't help asking. That he's too wild, too independent, that he'll never settle down. Mrs. Sullivan shrugged. People always talk about what they don't understand. True to his word, Keegan returned the next day. Pearl had just finished meeting with the town council about the teaching position when she spotted him waiting outside, leaning against a hitching post. Mr. James, she greeted him, suddenly conscious of her simple blue dress and the way the wind was tugging strands of her light brown hair free from its pins. Miss Fairchild. His smile transformed his rugged face. How did your meeting go? Very well. I start teaching on Monday. She couldn't keep the excitement from her voice. It's only temporary, but it's something. That's excellent news. I thought we might celebrate your new position with lunch at the hotel restaurant. When Pearl hesitated, he added, Mrs. Sullivan can join us as chaperone, if you're concerned about propriety. Pearl found herself accepting before she could overthink it. During lunch, Keegan told her about his ranch and the small town of Riverdale. It's growing, he explained. The railroads brought more settlers each year. We've got most everything you need now, doctor, dentist, 2 churches. And how long have you lived here, Mr. James? Call me Keegan, please. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. I came out after the war. Started with 20 acres and 6 cows. Now I've got 2,000 acres and a decent herd. You built all that yourself? Pearl was impressed. With these 2 hands and a lot of stubborn determination, he confirmed. What about you? What brought you west, besides the obvious? Pearl considered the question carefully. I suppose I wanted adventure. And purpose. In Boston, I was just one more spinster aunt, useful for minding children and helping at church socials. And now you're a schoolteacher in Wyoming territory, Keegan said with admiration. Sounds like you found your adventure after all. Over the next few weeks, Pearl settled into life in Riverdale. The schoolchildren were lively but respectful, and she discovered she had a talent for teaching. In the evenings, she helped Mrs. Sullivan with cooking and mending, paying for her room with work until her first teacher's wages came in. Keegan visited regularly, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry, fresh apples from his orchard, a warm shawl when the weather turned colder. Pearl found herself looking forward to his visits, enjoying his stories and his quiet appreciation of her opinions. One crisp November afternoon, as Pearl was dismissing her students, she looked up to see Thomas Wilkes standing in the doorway of the schoolhouse. She recognized him from descriptions she'd heard around town, tall and prosperous-looking, with a neat mustache and expensive clothes. Miss Fairchild, he asked, removing his hat. I believe we have some unfinished business. Pearl's heart hammered in her chest. I don't believe we have any business at all, Mr. Wilkes. The last student ran out, leaving them alone. Wilkes stepped closer. I may have been hasty in my judgment, he said smoothly. My foreman made the decision to send you back before I even saw you. Now that I've had the chance to observe you in town, I find you quite suitable after all. Pearl stared at him in disbelief. Suitable? Yes. You're clearly educated and respectable. The children seem to mind you well. These are valuable qualities in a rancher's wife. He smiled, revealing perfect teeth. I'm prepared to honor our original agreement. Pearl felt a surge of anger she'd never experienced before. How generous of you, Mr. Wilkes. But I'm afraid I must decline. His smile faltered. Miss Fairchild, you misunderstand. I'm offering you marriage, a comfortable home, security. I understand perfectly, Pearl interrupted. You rejected me sight unseen because I wasn't pretty enough for your taste. Now that you've discovered I might be useful, you've reconsidered. But I have also reconsidered, Mr. Wilkes, and I find you lacking in the qualities I seek in a husband. Wilkes's face darkened. You're making a serious mistake. There aren't many opportunities for a woman alone out here. I'm not alone, Pearl replied, gathering her books. I have friends in Riverdale. Good day, Mr. Wilkes. She brushed past him, head high, though her hands trembled. As she stepped outside, she nearly collided with Keegan, who was approaching the schoolhouse with a bouquet of late wildflowers. Pearl, he asked, noting her distress. What's wrong? Before she could answer, Wilkes emerged from the schoolhouse. James, he said coldly, I might have known you'd be circling, always picking up what others discard. Keegan's expression hardened, but he kept his voice level. Miss Fairchild isn't discarded goods, Wilkes. She's a lady deserving of respect. A lady without prospects, Wilkes sneered. I offered her a second chance, which she foolishly rejected. Perhaps because she recognized a poor offer when she heard one. Keegan replied. Wilkes stepped closer, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. You've been a thorn in my side for years, James. One day you'll push too far. Pearl moved between them. That's enough. Mr. Wilkes, I've given you my answer. Please leave. After a tense moment, Wilkes backed down. You'll regret your choice, Miss Fairchild, he said before mounting his horse and riding away. Keegan watched him go, then turned to Pearl. Are you all right? Pearl nodded, though she still felt shaken. He wanted to renew his offer of marriage. And you refused. Of course I refused. The man didn't even meet me before deciding I was too plain for his taste. She looked at the flowers in Keegan's hand. Are those for me? Keegan seemed almost embarrassed as he offered her the bouquet. Last of the season. Found them growing near the creek on my property. Pearl buried her face in the colorful blooms. They're beautiful. Thank you. Would you like to go for a ride this Sunday? I could show you some of the countryside, Keegan suggested. If Mrs. Sullivan approves, of course. Pearl smiled. I'd like that very much. Sunday dawned clear and cold, perfect for riding. Keegan arrived at the boarding house with 2 horses, his own sturdy gelding, and a gentle mare for Pearl. She's called Daisy, Keegan explained as he helped Pearl mount. Sweetest horse I've ever owned. They rode for hours, Keegan showing Pearl his favorite places: a hidden valley where wildflowers bloomed in spring, a high ridge with views that stretched for miles, a clear stream where trout jumped in the sunlight. It's so vast, Pearl marveled, gazing at the landscape. In Boston, you can never see this much sky. Do you miss it? The city? Keegan asked. Pearl considered the question. I miss certain things. Libraries. Musical performances. But there's something about this place. She gestured to the open plains and distant mountains. It feels like freedom. Keegan nodded in understanding. That's why I came west. To breathe free air. They stopped for a picnic lunch by the stream, sitting on a blanket Keegan had brought. As they ate sandwiches and apples, Pearl gathered her courage to ask about his sister. Mrs. Sullivan mentioned you had a sister who was a mail order bride. Keegan's expression grew solemn. Hannah. She came west in '67, just after I settled here. Married a man in Colorado Territory. He paused, his eyes distant. He was cruel to her. By the time I found out and went to bring her home, she was already gone. Pneumonia, they said, but I think her heart just gave out from the misery. I'm so sorry, Pearl whispered, instinctively reaching for his hand. Keegan's fingers closed around hers. That's why I help the girls who get sent back. No one helped Hannah when she needed it. They sat in silence for a moment, hands joined, until Keegan seemed to shake off the dark memories. Enough about sad things, he said. Tell me about your first weeks of teaching. Are the children behaving themselves? As autumn deepened into winter, Pearl and Keegan's friendship blossomed. He escorted her to church on Sundays and often joined her and Mrs. Sullivan for supper. Pearl found herself thinking about him during quiet moments at the schoolhouse, remembering the sound of his laugh or the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Christmas approached, bringing festive preparations to Riverdale. The schoolchildren were practicing carols for the holiday pageant, and Pearl was busy creating costumes and props. One afternoon, as she was cutting paper stars, Keegan appeared at the schoolhouse door with a small pine tree. "Thought your students might enjoy decorating this," he explained. The children cheered when they saw the tree, and Pearl felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the pot-bellied stove heating the room. "That's very thoughtful," she told Keegan as the students eagerly hung paper ornaments on the branches. "I have another surprise," he said quietly. "The town council met yesterday. They voted to offer you the teaching position permanently, if you want it." Pearl's heart soared. "Truly? They want me to stay?" "Everyone wants you to stay, Pearl." The intensity in Keegan's eyes made her breath catch. "Especially me." Before she could respond, they were surrounded by children asking for help hanging ornaments on higher branches. The Christmas pageant was a success, with every child remembering their lines and the carols sung in mostly perfect harmony. Afterward, as the town gathered for refreshments in the church hall, Keegan approached Pearl with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "It's beautiful," Pearl breathed, opening it to find it empty. "But I don't have anything for you." "You being here is gift enough," Keegan replied. "I never thought I'd find someone like you, Pearl." The hall was crowded and noisy, hardly the place for an intimate conversation, but Pearl felt as though they were the only two people present. "Like me, someone who sees the beauty in this harsh land. Someone who isn't afraid of hard work and doesn't complain about the difficulties. Someone who makes me laugh and think and want to be a better man." Keegan took her hand. "I'm not good with fancy words, Pearl, but I care for you deeply." Pearl felt tears prick her eyes. "I care for you too, Keegan." Mrs. Sullivan appeared beside them, her eyes twinkling. "Keegan James, are you going to stand there all night, or are you going to ask this girl to marry you properly?" Keegan flushed. "Mrs. Sullivan, I was trying to be romantic. Romance is all well and good, but a direct question gets a direct answer," the older woman declared. "Now, I'll just step away and let you continue." As Mrs. Sullivan retreated, Pearl couldn't help laughing. "She's quite a force of nature." "That she is," Keegan agreed, then grew serious again. "But she's right. I'm not one for beating around the bush." He took both of Pearl's hands in his. "Pearl Fairchild, I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Pearl's heart felt so full it might burst. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Their engagement was the talk of Riverdale. Most people expressed delight, though Pearl overheard whispers about how surprising it was that confirmed bachelor Keegan James had finally decided to marry, and to that plain schoolteacher, no less. "Don't listen to them," Mrs. Sullivan advised when she caught Pearl's downcast expression after one such comment. "People always talk. What matters is what's in Keegan's heart, and that man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." Pearl knew Mrs. Sullivan was right, but the words still stung. One evening in January, as she and Keegan sat by the fire in Mrs. Sullivan's parlor, she finally voiced her insecurity. "Does it bother you that I'm not beautiful like some of the other women in town?" Keegan looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? I know what people say. That you could have had your pick of prettier women." Keegan set aside the book he'd been reading to her and took her hands. "Pearl, when I look at you, I see the most beautiful woman I've ever known. Your eyes light up when you talk about books or your students. Your smile makes my heart skip a beat. The way you face challenges with courage and grace amazes me every day." Pearl blinked back tears. "You truly see me that way?" "I burned that note for a reason," Keegan said firmly. "The man who wrote it was blind, and anyone who can't see your beauty is blind too." They planned a spring wedding, when the weather would be fair enough for an outdoor celebration at the Double J Ranch. Pearl continued teaching, saving her wages to contribute to their future household. Keegan worked on expanding the ranch house, adding a larger kitchen and a second bedroom for the children we might be blessed with, he explained, making Pearl blush. As their wedding day approached, Pearl received an unexpected letter from Boston. Her aunt had passed away, leaving Pearl a small inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to help establish their life together comfortably. We could use it to buy those Hereford cattle you've been wanting, Pearl suggested when she showed Keegan the letter. Are you sure? You could buy yourself a fine wedding dress or furniture for the house. Pearl shook her head. I want to invest in our future. Besides, Mrs. Sullivan is helping me remake her daughter's wedding dress, and it's lovelier than anything I could buy. Keegan kissed her then, right in the middle of the street, scandalizing old Mrs. Peterson who was passing by. You're a remarkable woman, Pearl Fairchild. Soon to be Pearl James, she reminded him with a smile. Their wedding day in April was perfect, clear skies, mild temperatures, and wildflowers beginning to bloom across the plains. Pearl wore the remade wedding dress, ivory satin with lace trim, and carried a bouquet of spring blossoms. Keegan, dressed in a new suit, waited for her under an arch of flowering branches, his face alight with joy when he saw her approaching. The entire town turned out for the celebration, even Thomas Wilkes, who had eventually accepted Pearl's rejection with grudging respect. As Pearl and Keegan exchanged vows before the traveling preacher, she couldn't help reflecting on how differently her life had turned out from what she'd planned. She had come west seeking security and purpose, expecting a practical partnership with a stranger. Instead, she had found true love with a man who saw her inner beauty when others had dismissed her as too plain. The wedding feast lasted well into the evening, with dancing and laughter and enough food to feed the county. As the sun set, casting golden light across the ranch, Keegan led Pearl away from the celebration to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. Happy, Mrs. James? He asked, wrapping his arms around her. Happier than I ever dreamed possible, she replied honestly. When that note said I was too plain, I thought my life was over. Now I see it was just beginning. Keegan kissed her softly. That note was the best thing that ever happened to me. It brought you into my life. Later that night, after the guests had departed and they were alone in their home, Pearl showed Keegan the locket he had given her for Christmas. Inside, she had placed a tiny fragment of charred paper, the only piece of the burned note she had managed to retrieve that day on the road. To remind me, she explained, that sometimes rejection leads to the greatest blessing of all. 5 years later, Pearl stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Keegan taught their 3-year-old son, William, to ride his first pony. Their infant daughter, Hannah, named for Keegan's sister, slept peacefully in Pearl's arms. The Double J Ranch had prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Pearl still taught occasionally, filling in when the new schoolteacher needed assistance, but her primary joy came from raising their children and building their life together. As Keegan lifted William from the pony and carried him back toward the house, their son's laughter echoing across the yard, Pearl felt a wave of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. That crumpled note with its cruel words had led her to this moment, to a man who saw beyond appearances to the heart within, to children who filled her days with wonder, to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. Keegan climbed the porch steps, setting William down to run inside for a cookie promised by their housekeeper. He kissed Pearl softly, then placed a gentle hand on his sleeping daughter's head. What are you thinking about, looking so serious? He asked. Pearl smiled, leaning into his embrace. I was thinking that I'm not too plain for this life. That I was made for it, in fact. You were made for me, Keegan said simply. And I was made for you. It just took us a while to find each other. As the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Pearl knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of a man who had seen her beauty when others had been blind to it. And in that knowledge, she found a joy so complete it defied description.